Coaching in Session,
your exclusive destination for unparalleled personal and professional growth.
With your host, Michael Rearden.
Whether you choose to live within limits or break free, your mindset journey begins here.
Welcome, Adam Haston, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I am doing amazingly well, thank God.
All right, today we're going to be having a good conversation. We're going to be talking about your work, and then we're also going to be talking about your book, The Wonder Effect. So today we're going to be having a deliberate conversation on basically helping people with the curiosity and optimism that everyone has, and it's going to be helping them with their growth and potential in their life. So if we could, can you please tell everyone who you are, what you do, and of course, how you help?
Sure. My name's Adam Haston. I have a lot of hats that I wear. One of them, obviously, is as author of the book, The Wonder Effect. That's not something that it's been more of something that I've been doing passionately. As far as like my career, I've had lots of different transitions. Right now, I have been a real estate developer as well as a fund manager.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So one of the things I know with personal development and like helping people is it is an act of love. For example, teachers, when you go into the profession of teaching, it's not so much to make a dollar. It's more to have an impact on the children's life that you're going to be teaching. And I remember when I first started teaching, I was doing business finance as my major prior, and I was making good money for an 18, 19-year-old, doing, business financing and accounting. But I'm telling you, it was soulless work for me. And I was like, is this life, at 18, 19 years old? And I said, I was always having that inclination of teaching. And, the stigma or the statistics of how much teachers make is not necessarily enticing to an individual saying, oh, I'm going to go into this profession and make a bunch of money. But most of those teachers who go in to that profession, they don't look at the money. They say, I'm going to make a bunch of difference. And so when we look at your work, your passionate work of helping people with their personal growth, how did that begin?
So I can get to that. I do want to say something, though, because I think it's an important point because of the way that you were framing the way that you got to your decision. So one of the things that I had done in my past was I helped start and run a private school. So I was involved in a lot of the decisions made around that. And initially, it was an amazing thing that I was doing, and I loved it for a number of years. And I felt that same sense of purpose and accomplishment. But I would say that towards the end, I felt and what that taught me is that sometimes you can be doing, let's say, even life-saving work or extremely meaningful work, but you're not happy in the work itself. For example, I don't know if it's a cliche, but there's definitely a lot of, you can speak to a lot of doctors that they go through all of medical school. They actually start doing the work that they're doing. They might be, like I said, literally saving people's lives and be absolutely miserable from work that you could objectively say is life-changing and extremely meaningful. So I do want to separate those two things because not always doing the meaningful work is something that you might be happy in doing, or at least doing full time. So one of the things that I would advocate for is this idea of not necessarily feeling like you have to just do one or the other. And I think that you can gain meaning from lots of different ways in your life and contributions that you make. Certainly don't think that there's anything wrong with trying to be financially successful at the same time. So I do feel like there's not a contradiction in those things. And really, I would say that's one of the ways that brought me to write the book, which is that it's always been important to me to consider the big questions in life and to give back. And so part of the process of writing the book was a process of trying to contribute and have an impact on the world, although the things that I'm doing presently don't have that outward appearance, meaning like doing the financial things or running a fund or any of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, that it doesn't have to be a contradiction to trying and making efforts towards having impact on people and doing good in the world.
Do you have a family, Adam?
I do. I have a wife and 7 children.
Okay, you have a lot of children. Would you say that spending time with your children is better than spending money on your children?
The reason I'm laughing is because I feel like one of the things that I learned in school was that so many answers start with, it depends. And the reason I say that is because on an emotional level, it might be better spending time with your children, and on a physical level, it might be better spending money on your children so that they can eat. So it really depends on what we're actually talking about when we're talking about spending, or whether or not it's the time or the money.
Well, the secret is a mindset, because I've spoken with entrepreneurs, I've spoken with people who have been on both sides, right? We have people who are maybe in the middle, it's a hybrid. And we have people who have this mindset of, I'm going to work because I want my children to eat. And then there's also a mindset of, I can work and I can make money at any given time. My children are growing up so quickly, let me pay attention. So this is all a mindset here, right? Right? We can be on both sides of the fence, but our mind is always going to be pinpointed on typically one thing. You know, when I was young, like early on, money was the big thing, right? And then it was difference. Now, going on to your point earlier, right? Very true. We shouldn't just be looking at the jobs in life that are going to maybe save a life. A police officer, a firefighter, EMT, a doctor, all of those things are great, jobs. And, we can even look at maybe lawyers, people who protect and defend, but then we could look at lawyers who kind of, are on the other side of that, coin. So there is just a mindset in your profession, because you can be anything in the world, and it could be good, it could be bad. And that's all relative talk, because I can say a good parent is one parent who spends time with their children, right? It's the same thing with success, right? Who defines success? You do, right? And the same thing with your mindset. You define your mindset. So the conversation today is not so much of looking at who you are, but looking at, in generalities of where a mind can go, because it seems like we're going down the road of a business mindset rather than a personal growth mindset. And we can go any path you want. This is what Coaching in Session is. Coaching in Session is a flexible podcast where we talk to individuals who have done amazing things, who have been successful in their own right, who are driven. And of course, they have a story to tell, because my story might not be the same as your story. And we're interested in hearing your story, like where you came from, how you developed into this person, and where you're going in your life.
Sure. So to go back to your question, I think that I probably would frame it from the standpoint of, so there's a famous psychologist, his name was Abraham Maslow, and he invented the idea of Maslow's pyramid, which basically says that that all of the layers on that pyramid, it starts out with basically having your basic needs met. And then it goes up higher and higher on the pyramid to emotional needs met, and then to the point of self-actualization. I probably would say that that's how I would think about it, and the importance that I would place on how to interact and how to contribute with your children. Ultimately, I think that if we can take the assumption that our kids' needs are met, the one idea that that for me is an important idea is that lots of things can be done by lots of people, but what your own personal contribution, what you're able to individually make, that's what's going to be most important in what you do. And so for your children, you can't outsource parenting. And therefore, the most important thing that you can do is give them the unique message that only you can give to them based on your background and based on your life experiences and based on your personal education. So that's probably how I would think about it. Yeah.
Okay. What would you say is your greatest success in your life?
So I would break it down. Both probably personally and professionally. I think that going back, because it feels like it's somewhat of a theme in what we're discussing right now, I always think that it's important to hesitate in thinking about the ways that you impact the world have to be grand and have to be macro. I think that it's something that on the large scale, sometimes things that can trip people up is that they feel like if they're not making some grand statement, they're not saving the world in some way, then what they're doing is not worth something. So for me, the way that I think about that is you have in your own personal sphere and your sphere of influence, and then in different professional ways. You have influence and impact. So I normally would say that the biggest success that I have is having an amazing family, amazing children, and my wife and I have worked extremely hard in raising our children and trying to instill values that I think are important. And ultimately, if you raise good children and who become good people, I think you to put it in business terminology, you scale your impact and you can impact the world on an even greater level. And the opposite is also true. We've seen lots of people who have not raised children right, and there's been disaster that has come from that. On a professional level, I would probably say it's in the variety of things that I've done that gives me a sense of fulfillment. I helped run programming at a synagogue in Connecticut for about 5 years. I started as I said, a school, and I've started a couple of businesses. And for each one, I've been happy with the people that I've worked with, and I feel like I've made contributions both to people that have benefited from what I've created and from what I've done, as well as having personal, financial, and otherwise success. Those are the ways that I would think about it for myself. And I feel like I've also been able to have somewhat of a of a balance with that, and not having it just overwhelm my life, that my work and my business is taking over all my time. I'm very fortunate that I'm able to travel, which I absolutely love, and I consider that a success because I love going other places. I think it's important for personal development as well. And I think that on a health level, I've also stayed in shape, and I've run marathons. I've climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa, and I've got to do lots of the fun things as well. So I think that if I'm thinking about success, it's that it's not necessarily just in one domain, but it's in a multifaceted area of domains.
Yeah, I think of in life, let's be fictitious for a minute, right? If you could teleport to all your destinations that you want to go, let's say you want to maybe go to Italy for a weekend, then you want to go to Germany, spend some time there, hike in the Swiss Alps or whatever you want to do. So there's a lot of places that you can go, right? Traveling. Would the journey be more enjoyable if you just teleported to these places and enjoyed them, or the whole process of going on the airplane and getting the tickets and doing all of that? What is your perception on that?
I feel like the popular answer would be that the journey is the destination. Like that would be the classic thing. And so just to help you understand my thinking, I assume that's a classic way of looking at it. And so since I feel almost a default in thinking about that, it makes me want to take a step back, doubt the expected answer, and think a little bit more in depth about it. I'll say it like this. If I was reframing the question and saying, would I enjoy being in any of these places if it meant not having to travel there? And I feel with great certainty that I would be able to do that. If I had to endure suffering to get there, I might be less inclined to want to go there. That being said, I think that there is an appreciation that comes from the effort and the work that it takes to get from wherever you are to wherever you're going, particularly when it comes to, like, for example, when I was telling you that, running the marathon, you can't just like teleport to be in a position to do that. But once you've put in the time, effort, and energy in order to prepare for that, in order to get there, that it's become something that's become like integrated within you. So I would say maybe slightly different. I know it's not exactly your question, but the way that I would think about it slightly differently is if in order to go to some of these places, you'd have to learn about the culture, learn about the language, and develop an appreciation. I think that when you then go there, you will absolutely appreciate it in a completely new way, in a completely new light, which I'm inclined to think is perhaps somewhere of where you're coming from and what you're thinking or what you're asking.
Okay, yeah. I was more so getting a gist of your mindset. I think I got it. So I want to bring this conversation into the idea of results, right? People, they look at the result of something, right? If they start a race, they want to finish it. If they have a family, they want it to be successful, maybe with kids, a happy marriage, maybe buying a home, traveling to different places. They have a job or start a business, they want it to be successful. So when we start to look at the results of what is to come, right? We want the better side of things, right? We want the goodness for the most part. How would someone begin that process? Would it be just seeking a mentor, seeking guidance, reading books? Or would it be just failing a bunch and trying to figure out, what doesn't work to figure out what does?
So I feel like with many things in life, there's not really one right answer. There's what you're making me think about is there's a quote that I have on my wall over here from Walt Disney, and it says, "A person should set their goals as early as they can and devote all their energy and talent to getting there. With enough effort, they may achieve it, or they may find something that is even more rewarding. But in the end, no matter the outcome, they will know they have been alive." So it's something that I think is a powerful way of looking at it. And ultimately, I think you have to get a sense of yourself. You have to think for yourself. And it's one of my favorite quotes also, which is that I think it's from I think it was Thoreau. He said that if you don't think for yourself, others will think for you without thinking of you. And therefore, it's like you have to be one who's willing to make the effort and the thoughtfulness for what it is that you want to do. And sometimes that's removing layers of what's been placed upon your expectations that have been placed upon you. Then with that like removal, you can then get a sense of, start to see what is bubbling up with inside of you are. And then ultimately you have to start pulling that thread of your interests and going where that goes. And that could be in big ways, that could be in small ways. But what's going to happen if you then allow yourself to go down that path? You're going to have, yes, a sense of adventure, and you're going to also have to have some level of faith in it being worth it. And when you go down that path, you'll be surprised at what's possible. And what ends up happening often is that in that process, you change as a person, and that opens up the pathways and the possibilities of what is in store for you. So I really would say that it starts with some thoughtfulness, but I think that the way that I often refer to it is imagination in motion. And that is that you have to imagine what's possible, but if it only stays up in your mind, it only stays in your emotions, that's not going to change what's here on the ground or what the circumstances are. The thing that I feel like I liken to it a lot is the idea of trying to learn how to swim from a book without actually being in the water. And if you don't combine both the theory with some practice, yes, you're not going to be perfect, or you might not even swim at first. So therefore you have to swim in a controlled environment in the shallow end. But if you're not doing both of those things of trying to learn, but also trying to act that into motion, I don't think you'll actually be integrated with that, and you won't learn from it. So when you're asking like, what's the best way? I think it's a combination of those things, but definitely there's got to be action behind, and the desire, and probably also goal setting that will help you towards getting to that end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true. The theory and the practice for swimming is definitely something they have to experience both ends, because same thing with riding a bike. I was a swim instructor in college for a period of time, and one of the things we did as the foundation, it wasn't so much of swimming; it was about trust. It was about trust in oneself. It's very similar to the quote or the idea of a bird is not afraid of the branch breaking because because the bird has wings and it can fly. And very similar to being in the water, right? We're not going to be afraid of drowning because we can swim. Now, we have to develop that trust within us, right? We have to understand the water. We have to understand that there's a buoyancy effect that we can utilize for our body. We don't have to be struggling and pretending we're rocks trying to move our arms and feet. So there's there's an idea, the practice end, where we become so comfortable in the water where we're like fish, right? Like if you ever saw a kid swimming and they have been swimming for a period of time, they're like fish. Adults are typically maybe in there to work out. They're, maybe just to cool off or something like that. If they're with their kids, they're playing a little bit, dad might be throwing them around or something along those lines. But the kids are fish. They're going to the bottom. They're picking up toys. They're exploring, right? But it wasn't on day one. Day one was maybe I'm afraid of the water. Day two was, okay, I'm getting a little bit more comfortable, right? Now we're kicking our feet. Now we're moving our arms. Okay, now I have to put my face in the water, right? Do I have to close my eyes? Do I have to open my eyes? And so there's just so many factors that have to happen as we are beginning the process to learn how to swim, to learn how to be those fish, to learn how to be those children or adults that are jumping off the side of the pool or the high diving board. There's a process to it. Of course, there's some children naturally. I know there's studies, and there's also just the statistics of newborns going into pools and how they're able to float because they're more buoyant, right? Children are born with two fears, the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises, right? Drowning is not one of them. So they're naturally, softer in the sense of tension. Because if you add the fear now and you put a kid into the water, they're like rocks, and rocks are going to sink straight to the bottom. But if it's the ball and it's air and it's full of, and we could say the air is trust, right? It's going to be more buoyant to the top, right? So they don't know about the fears. And we can now use that story and just kind of put it into our conversation now of there are so many fears in our world today of businesses, for example, right? 50% of businesses fail within 3 years or something along those lines. So there's going to be this idea of people might want personal growth in their life. People might want to get good results. People might want to live a lifestyle where they can travel all over the world, but they're afraid to take that first step. They're afraid to not only learn the theory, but to put the theory into practice. what would be the precursor for someone to say, you know what, I see the fear, I feel the fear, but I'm going to step into it anyway?
You're asking what could give people courage?
However you interpret the question is basically what coaching a session is.
Okay. So just trying to clarify if that's okay. So you're saying that people have fears, and how can they step past their fears in order to move?
If that's how you want to go, the direction is yours. You can go anywhere you want.
Okay. So if the question is how you can move forward and have progress in spite of or despite of the fears that might inhibit you from doing that, I think there's a few frameworks, but one thing ends up coming to mind, and that is basically first getting an understanding of where that's coming from, and also getting a sense of the naturalness of that. So there's a story that I heard from this person. His name is Rob O'Neill, and he's the person who ended up taking the kill shot on Osama bin Laden. And he was telling the experience in this audience, and somebody from the audience asked him, were you afraid? So his answer stuck with me, and his answer was that fear is what keeps you alive and panic is what gets you killed. So I think that there has to be an understanding of what fear is, and fear is something that's there to protect you and to heighten your senses so that you will be more effective and that you will be able to succeed. What it's not is something that's there just to prevent you from taking action. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is that I think that people avoid unpleasant. And so I think that the sense of fear, if people stop doing the thing that's causing them to have that anxiety, I think that they seek to avoid it so that they don't have to have that experience. However, what that's not going to do is lead to personal growth and lead to personal change. So an example that I think about for this is, I remember once hearing this idea that if you had to have a life-saving surgery and the condition of having that surgery was that you weren't able to have anesthesia, but it's a life-saving surgery. So just having the information that this surgery is going to be beneficial and save your life, even having that information in your mind will not remove either the physical or the emotional. But it won't remove the physical pain that will be with getting it cut and having the surgery. And it certainly won't remove the emotional anxiety of what's going to happen. But to allow the fear to inhibit you from doing what's right and best for you, that would be wrong. So I think that the knowledge is helpful in order to be able to manage that sense and that feeling, but at the same time, it'll also be enough to let you move forward with it. So you'll be able to hold the feeling of fear at the same time of moving forward with it. So that's a framework that I like to think about in allowing for that. I do also want to say that from my personal perspective, I think that that we're at this point in time that to try to do the safe thing is the most dangerous thing you can do at this point in time. I think that there's so much exponential change that if you're not willing to grow and to get to your highest level of capacity and impact, I think that you'll either behind or possibly worse. So I think that the idea of allowing fear to prevent you from having any progress or taking any risks, I think it's the riskiest thing now to do the safe thing.
Very true. I think of the story of the king who had 3 attendants, and I always butcher the story, but basically he gave each of the attendants like 100 gold pieces, and each of the attendants basically had to have those 100 gold pieces when the king came back from the journey. So one of the persons, did trade and barter, right? And they amplified the money. Another person invested the money in businesses, right? Amplified the money. The third person hid the money under a rock. And basically, so he would have the 100 gold pieces. So when the king returned, he can get his 100 gold pieces that was given to him. So he can say, hey, I have your money here, right? I didn't spend anything. It's here, the same exact money you gave me, right? Well, the king comes back and he's very happy with the first guy. He's very happy with the second guy, but he's displeased with the third attendant. And you have to ask, like, why was the king displeased with the third attendant? Because he had the same 100 gold pieces that he had given them from the beginning. But the king went on to say that the fact that you didn't fear, or risk the 100 gold pieces to amplify or to make more from it, displeases me. And then, the story is he killed the guy, right? But it's just to say that, we can have good intentions of trying to save, put the money under the mattress, right? Stay in the sidelines, right? But then there's the people who are the risk takers, right? The two out of, the 2 out of 3 attendants. And, brings this idea of how life is all about risks in a sense, right? We take safe risks typically, but then there's risks that might not be good. For example, you take a second mortgage out on your home and you bet it all on black at the casino, right? It's probably not a safe risk. But then we can look at safe risks like maybe investing in yourself, starting a business, getting mentorship, right? Getting resources like books and guides that are going to help develop you, right? Personal development is about you enhancing yourself, right? There's so many people who go to college not because of the degree alone, because you don't necessarily need a degree to be, like a graphic designer, right? Of course, you will learn the skills in college, maybe that's going to help you, but then you can also get a mentor. You can get people who have already been in the profession, and you can go that road. Now, if you want to be a lawyer, you want to be a doctor, teachers, of course, you need certifications for those things. So that's going to be a necessary path for you. But then there's a lot of things that people are thinking, especially in the mindset of America, that they have to go to school, that they have to go to college, that they have to go down this path. And then at some point, they find themselves in a 9-to-5 working until they're 65, and then they realize that they haven't done anything with their life. So the fear, right, of the unknown, the fear of starting the businesses, you have those, right? You haven't just created one business, you created multiple businesses, right? You have the mindset of results. You have the mindset of doing what might be fearful right now, but it's going to create a lifestyle that you can enjoy and that your family is going to appreciate. They might not appreciate it right now because, maybe you're so busy and they want to, go out for some ice cream. And I'm not saying that you don't do it, but you have a vision, right? You have a vision and it's a mission of yours. And when people give themselves this idea that tomorrow can be anything I want it to be, but if I don't take actions, I'm not going to get it. But if I do take action, there's always the possibility. So when you're working with someone, especially like if someone's coming into one of your businesses, right? So let's say I'm a new person coming into one of your businesses, right? It could be anyone you can choose. And basically I'm starting from nothing, right? I might have a little bit of background, a little bit of foundational work, but I'm looking at how can I be a success in the business? What is something you would instill upon me?
So everybody works differently with different people, but I just wanted to comment on what you had said just before, and it made me think of this quote. Actually, I'm pretty sure the quote's in the book, but basically it says that ships are safest in the harbor, but that's not what ships are made for. And so yes, there's like the idea of the one that just held on to it, but didn't actually take any risks. So yes, he did preserve the thing, but that's not what the thing was for. So that's what you made me think about when you'd made that comment. So as far as what I would instill, I'll tell you that my approach often, and I'm not sure if it's for everybody, it's certainly not, but in general, my approach is an approach of independence and interdependence and ownership mentality. So I would say that the personality of most of my businesses are startup-like. And what that means is there's lots of different hats that people wear in the businesses. Even if you have an official title, you might be doing lots of different things. And I think that the way that I'll say instill, but it's not necessarily instilling, it's giving people responsibility and allowing them the freedom to do what you're asking them to do. It's okay to make mistakes. It's certainly okay to ask for advice and guidance. But if you're not willing to explore and you're not willing to learn on your own and you're not willing to take like an ownership type of position in it, that you have set a goal and you have something that you're going to go after, that's not something that ends up working well in my environment. Again, it depends on what people are doing. But that's certainly, so if that's called instilling, I'm not sure, but that's the way that I would approach it. And I think that ultimately that's where people need to be presently, meaning today, that's the approach that people have to take, that they have to assume that people can't tell them how to do everything, and that you have to have this personal sense of you're going to explore and learn on your own in order to get done what needs to get done.
Perfect. Yes. And I definitely am with you on that. I know when it comes to instilling or teaching someone or just kind of giving direction to someone, it's all going to be personal, right? There's a saying, right? People don't choose jobs, they choose bosses. And, just getting to understand different mindsets is what coaching in session is, right? It's not about answering my questions. I say this all the time on the podcast. If you listen to any episodes, I can ask a question and it could be, hey, what dog do you have? And you're like, you start talking about your work or your job or something, right? It doesn't even have to be irrelevant, right? Because it's about the conversation. People don't necessarily want to have a script of interview questions and it says, all right, audience, I'm going to ask, Adam, all these questions, right? Make sure you tune in. No, they want to have a conversation, right? They want to have something real, because in our, technology world or our digital world, there are so many, false smiles, and I call them false smiles for, people saying that they're happy, right? They are Instagram famous or something along those lines, and they have all these followers, but yet they're so unhappy. And so the conversation is not so much of, all right, let's talk about one simple topic. It's about to understand that there's going to be different people with different mindsets and different ways of thinking in the world. And it's okay to be different. It's okay to think differently. And what works for one person might not work for another. I know you probably are familiar with the idea or the quote of burn the ships at the harbor, right? You only have one plan A, right? You don't have a plan B or plan C. Now, that is not for everybody, of course, right? There's certain people that their minds that they need a plan B, they need a plan C. And it's not that to say that the person who has only plan A is going to be successful or more successful than the person who has plan A, B, and C. It's all about your deliberate nature, right? Maybe we can factor a little bit of luck, but the reality is if you want something, you can go get it, especially in America, right? It's the land of opportunity. People don't, immigrate to America because of, all of the laws and all the strict regulations and, that they would have to be going in. They go in for this idea of freedom for what they can have, right? People came over, I think, from England or something like that for religious freedom or something along those lines. And they would go into Massachusetts, Connecticut, and they would be able to express themselves. And that is what America is today, where people can express themselves. And I'm not a person to say that if someone is living a life of being a nomad and living under a bridge is living wrong. You get to choose at the end of the day who you want to be. And so the conversation, you and I had today was one of just learning about who you are, right? Learning about your experiences and your wisdoms and the things that you might have learned along your way in life. Because I always say, knowledge is great, right? You can read so many books, but when you get a mentor, when you get some wisdom in the room, right? Now you can pay attention, right? It's very like reminiscent of someone who's going to rule a kingdom for the first time. They might not have any experience doing it, but they have aides, they have, senators, they have politicians, right? Helping guide. Of course, there can be, prior tutelage from kings or queens or whoever it be to kind of give some guidance. But at the end of the day, if you're the ruler, you get to decide, and you get to be a ruler that everyone's going to admire or everyone is going to despise. And this is not to say that you're the ruler of your family or you're the ruler of your own life. It's just a concept. It's a concept of how you might not know everything. And I know I don't know everything, but this is an opportunity for, us to get to know each other a little bit more, for people to, maybe get something that they might have not have thought before, because our conversation today was definitely different from our typical conversations on coaching in a session, because, we're not necessarily just talking about a book or we're talking about one specific work, but it was, specifically of a conversation of mindset and learning of an individual. And so, as we begin to wrap up, I would love to, get some final words, some thoughts, if you wanted to instill anything into someone. And then also you can tell people where they can find you, reach out to you if they want to inquire more.
Sure. So the easiest place to find me is at my website, which is adamhaston.com. As far as what I would encourage people as call to actions or final thoughts would be the idea that really you need to be willing to be adventurous. You need to be willing to pull the threads of your interest and pursue that. I think that you'll be surprised at if you're willing to put in the effort and you're willing to put in the time, you're willing to put in the energy, you'd be surprised at the difference of what it'll make in your life, what it'll make in other people's lives, and the successes that you'll have. I think you need to be open to serendipity, but you also have to be willing to put in that energy, and that energy will transform you, will transform the world. So that's really the last, final thoughts that I would share. I always have tons of questions for people, but it's not my podcast. Be more than happy to ask further questions.
Well, this is, a good chance for people to reach out to you if they have questions, or to be that person or that inquisitor to say, hey, like you said this, like, what do you mean by that? Because, I find that when someone is learning, right, there's a lot of questions being asked. Think of your children when they were younger. Why, dad? Why? Right? There was a lot of why. And it wasn't because they're trying to be annoying. It was because they were curious. And I find that there's so many people in life that are curious, and some people don't invoke that curiosity, so they remain silent. But then there's going to be individuals, I know many people in the audience, they're very curious about the guests. They're very curious about what they say. So I encourage the audience to reach out to Adam, to ask questions, to be curious about his works and his life. And then, of course, if something he said resonated with you, look at how maybe, I don't know if you do it, but, seek mentorship. I know mentorship is very big today, because we can go to school for 4 to 6 years or however long you want to go to school. And the practical sense, right? When I was learning to be a teacher, school was great, right? I learned all of the theories, and I learned all the structures of what school was. But it wasn't until I was thrown into the classroom that I really, truly understand and learn how to become a teacher. The classroom management, right? Looking at different needs for the children, right? Because maybe they didn't eat, because it's inner city, right? Maybe there's something going on in the family, right? Some domestic violence. And so I had to learn how to navigate those things. They didn't teach me that in school, but I learned. And so I had teachers, principals helping me along the way. And I wouldn't be the person that I am today if I didn't have the guidance and the mentorship of my past. So all of that is to, be said, is that we learn from others. And so I do want to thank you, Adam, for coming on, spending some time, of course, talking about your work and sharing a bit of your story today.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me.